Hello, my name is Angela Hayes, and I'm the Associate Director of Alumni and Online Career Engagement. Thank you for joining us to discuss this very important topic. Please note that with this recording, you'll also see two salary negotiation handouts that you can use as a reference in your future negotiations. The longer one has a summary of most of the things we'll be discussing today in terms of salary negotiation itself. What it won't have is the background information about pay inequality that we'll be discussing first today. The shorter one is just for your quick reference if you want to have something to glance at before you walk into a salary negotiation. You'll also find my contact information at the end of these slides and my email address at the top of the longer handout. The other thing I want to let you know is I'm still getting over COVID, and so my voice isn't what I would like it to be. So I apologize in advance if it gives out a little bit while I'm talking to you. All right, so these are the points that we're going to cover. What is the wage gap? How does it affect you? Why does it happen? How to determine your worth in the marketplace, and how to effectively build your negotiation skills. So, wage discrimination has been illegal since the Equal Pay Act passed in 1963, but it still continues. Before the pandemic, it was estimated that if we kept going at the rate we were going, the wage gap would close in 2059. But the World Economic Forum recently released a report saying that the pandemic has set women back so far that it's likely to be 135 years before women will be paid the same as men for exactly the same work, and 268 years before women will get the same pay for similar work as men. In other words, in cases where there's more wiggle room in setting salaries. The gap also falls across almost all occupations. Women's full-time earnings are less than men's in almost all of the top 20 most common occupations for women and all of the top 20 most common occupations for men. Lockdowns hit female-dominated sectors the hardest and left women doing more, household chores and more homeschooling of their children. Even if they didn't have to drop out of the workforce and they were working from home, this affected their productivity and their chances for raises and their likelihood of promotions. Research has also found that during and post-pandemic, women are significantly less likely to be hired for leadership roles than they were about 3 years ago, so just before the pandemic. I'll say that again. Women are significantly less likely to be hired for leadership roles than they were not quite 3 years ago, just before the pandemic. So we've talked a bit about the wage gap and why it happens, how it affects you. And there are lots of layers to this. Take a moment, if you would, and just think about what some of the layers might be for why this happens, why this wage gap happens. Maybe jot some things down for later discussion, because on April 4th, we're going to have a Q&A office hours where people can come in and ask me whatever questions they have about this video that you're viewing. So some of the things that you might jot down, for example, are that women are much less likely to negotiate. There are all kinds of stereotypes about women. Maybe think through what some of these stereotypes are. Those who are mothers or even of childbearing age get penalized for that. I'm trying to think of a better word than penalized or a different word, but it's true. Get penalized for that in terms of promotions, in terms of pay raises, And that gets more prominent the more children a woman has, which is the opposite of what happens with men, but we're going to talk about that in a bit. Well, let's talk about it now. So men, when they have children, they're more likely to get a pay boost. And it's actually called the daddy pay boost or father pay boost. Women, as they have more children, get what's called a mommy penalty. So for men, one of the stereotypes is, well, he's got a family to support now. He's more committed. He deserves that promotion or higher pay or whatever it is. Women are held to higher performance standards than men, especially if they're mothers. So let's talk about Equal Pay Day. Equal Pay Day had been in April every year for many years, and it's the date in April representing how far the average woman had to work into the following year to make what the average man made the year prior. In 2023, Equal Pay Day is on March 14th. This date is based on the latest U.S. Census figures. And this is if we're averaging all women and men. In the past, this date and the amount on the dollar that women make compared to men was based on just full-time year-round workers. This year, a new methodology and last year for a bit was used because COVID pushed many women, especially women of color, into part-time or seasonal work or out of the workforce altogether. In 2022, the Equal Pay Day Coalition adopted a new, more inclusive methodology that also addresses women who work part-time or seasonally to get a more accurate picture of how the gender pay gap impacts diverse communities. So that's why we see it in March instead of where it's almost artificially in March when really it's probably still in April for the average worker, average female worker to get to what a man made the year prior. So women in general make 83 cents on the dollar that a man makes. In 2019, it was 80 cents. That's for white women. Black women make 58 cents on the dollar. So their Equal Pay Day really is around September 21st. It was 62 cents on the dollar in 2019. Latina women make 49 cents on the dollar, so their Equal Pay Day is December 8th. That one was 54 cents on the dollar in 2019. Native American women, it's 50 cents on the dollar, so their Equal Pay Day is about November 30th. For LGBTQ plus populations and transgender women, it's even worse across the board. And further education certainly increases wages for women, but women with graduate degrees earn less on average than men with bachelor's degrees. If the woman is a mother, as we talked about before, the pay disparity gets much worse. For example, Equal Pay Day for mothers in 2019 was June 4th. Equal Pay Day for Black mothers was July 31st, and Equal Pay Day for Latina mothers was November 2nd. I haven't been able to find similar figures since 2019, I think because of the disruption brought about by COVID. And as I said before, pay disparity gets more pronounced with each child a woman has. And this is full-time working mothers. This doesn't include those who work part-time or who have taken time off. This is full-time working mothers. Mothers are less likely to be hired and receive lower salaries when they are. They're also significantly less likely to get promoted, which is ironic since research shows that moms are some of the most productive, efficient employees. If a mother decides to take a year off, let's say when her child is born, she can expect to make 39% less throughout the rest of her career compared to a mother who did not take a year off. So while the pay gap has decreased somewhat over the years, except for the disruption caused by COVID. It's actually increasing between mothers and fathers, now even more so due to the pandemic. The pay gap between married women with children and married men with children is about 30%. And as I said before, men can expect an earning increase when they become fathers, while women can expect an earnings decline with each additional child. Those in the lowest paying jobs can expect to incur the largest motherhood penalty. And again, full-time working mothers is what we're talking about here. And this is for the reasons of some of the stereotypes that we talked about before. And even women of childbearing years who don't have children or don't ever plan to have children can still end up paying this penalty without even realizing it. Again, because of these stereotypes that we've discussed. So be thinking for our question and answer time on April 4th. Why do you think men get a pay boost when they have children? And why do you think women make less money if they're mothers, and then even less with each child they have? So let's talk about what happens very early on, right out of college. Research tells us that 1 year out of a bachelor's degree, the average woman will make 82 cents on the dollar compared to the man she stood next to at graduation. I dug into this further to see what happens in cases where these two got exactly the same degree, same grades, same experience level going in. What I found was that if they took identical jobs at the same company at the same time, the woman would be earning a salary that was 88 cents on the dollar compared to the man in the identical position within the same company. So why does this matter so much? When I'm working with women one-on-one, they often tell me that the starting salary isn't that big of a deal to them. They're just happy to be offered the job, and they know that once they get in there, they'll be able to show what they can do, and they'll undoubtedly get a big raise. That could happen, but it's unlikely. It usually doesn't. Because most organizations have a very set policy about raises, and it generally goes on a yearly percentage system. So if you're making 77 or 82 or even 88% of what a man's making to start, and you each get 5% raises each year, that's assuming he doesn't get promoted over you or you don't get promoted over him, the difference very quickly adds up, not just in salary or salary increases, but also bonuses, which are usually based on percentage of base pay, the percentage match that's going into your retirement, and your Social Security benefits. All of those are based on base pay. So base pay matters a lot. On average, depending on the occupation, the National Women's Law Center puts the average of lost income at about $406,280 over the course of a woman's working life. So that's on average. That can top 1 million for Hispanic women and slightly less than 1 million for Black and Native American women. On average, women who have an MBA, a law degree, or medical degree will lose closer to 2 million. So just take a moment to think, what would I do with an extra $1 million or an extra $2 million? Again, maybe jot some things down if you're planning to join us for the Q&A so that we can talk through that. So now that we know more about the wage gap and how it affects us, let's talk about how to prepare for a salary negotiation. First, I cannot express enough how important it is for you to research what you are worth in the marketplace. Here are some places that you can go to get a good idea of what sort of salary you should be making in a particular job in a particular part of the country, given your education and experience. These are also on your handout. So for example, on salary.com, you can put in your industry, job title, geographic location, your education, your experience, and a variety of other attributes, and that will produce a bell-shaped curve to tell you the range of what others are making at the low, middle, and high end. It also suggests, based on the information that you've entered, where you should fit within the range. It'll give you a line that says this is where you should fit within the range. And that range is golden for you. That way you go in knowing what you should be worth to them. We don't want to give the power to the employer. It's risky to think, well, they probably know what this position is worth. I'm sure it's a fair offer. I'm just glad to have the offer, and I don't want to upset them. I do understand that, and there might be cases where it does seem too risky to negotiate. And we'll talk about that in a bit, and we'll also talk about how to greatly decrease any risk of there being problems with the negotiation. And that'll make more sense as we talk through that. So now that we know all this about the gap and some of the layers that go into the gap, let's really focus in on the art of successful negotiation. This whole issue of the pay gap feels really big and difficult, but something that we can control is whether or not we choose to negotiate. That is within your control. So again, the first place to focus is finding out what you're worth in the marketplace, even before you have that first phone screen, because they might ask you in the phone screen what your wishes are for your pay. And we'll come back to that as well. The second thing to remember is that you're often dealing with well-trained, well-practiced negotiators. They know how to try to get you to not even try to negotiate, and they know how to make you feel kind of guilty if you do. That's their job. Often they've been told by the higher-ups to try to get the best person for the least cost they can. Keeping that in mind, that you'll be dealing with practiced negotiators, someone who's trained and is obviously looking out for the best interests of the organization, you need to come in trained and well-practiced also, so that you can represent your best interests in the negotiation. The most common example of the way an employer will try to hire you for the lowest salary possible is to try to get you to name a figure before they have extended a formal offer. Do everything you can to not be the first person to name a figure. So they might say something like, if we offered you X amount for this job, would you accept it? A good response from you would be something like, I'd really like to learn more about the job first. I need to know if I'm a good fit and if you're offering me the job. Or they might say, what kind of salary would it take for you to accept this job? And you can say, if the offer is fair, I'm sure we can reach an agreement. If you were to receive a job offer from us, would you accept it? And you can say, well, I'm very interested in the job and the company, but frankly, it depends on the offer. I'd be glad to respond to a specific offer. Or you could say, I'll consider any reasonable offer, or I'm sure you have a figure in mind. Would you share that with me? If they keep pressing and they won't go forward until you've answered the salary question, then say something like this. My research tells me that someone with my skills, education, and qualifications in this geographic location for this particular job should be making between this and this. Always give them a range, never just a figure. And then let silence be your friend. Let it sink in that you've done your research and you know what you should be making with reasoned, justified facts. Also, you might want to bump up the range a bit from your research, what your research said. Not a lot, just a bit, so that you don't leave money on the table. If they ask the same question in a phone screen, I would recommend bumping it down a bit so that you don't screen yourself out. You can always come up later in the in-person interview when you know more about the job and the responsibilities and those kinds of things. You'll want to practice these lines out loud with someone, these salary negotiation lines, so that they don't sound forced. They should come out easily because they're just common sense and reasonable. Once they've made an offer, ask for it in writing, including everything else like benefits, bonuses, time off, and so on, and ask for time to consider the offer. This buys you time to evaluate the offer, and it gives them time to get nervous about you accepting an offer from someone else. Because if you say you need time, I can promise you the first thing they think is, oh, she's entertaining other offers. And they might come back with more. They might offer you more. Make sure that you know your complete, prioritized, ideal job offer and how negotiable you are on each item, like benefits, time off, bonus structure, and so on, before you step back into a negotiation. Now, if you know all of this, understand all the parts of the job and the benefits offered, and feel ready to negotiate right on the spot, go for it. But most people can benefit from some time to review the offer and prepare themselves for the negotiation. When you're ready to negotiate, your approach and attitude is everything. You want them to feel good about you during and at the end of the negotiation. If you've won the negotiation, but they're not really sure anymore if they want to work with you, then you haven't won. I've worked with women who think the way to negotiate is the hardball method that's considered the stereotypical male power negotiator stance. That stereotype involves issuing ultimatums, making negative comments about the offer, asking to talk to someone in charge who knows what I'm worth because you obviously don't, getting up and walking out in the middle, and so on. Generally, the only time that would work is if you have a skill set and a background that's exceedingly difficult to find, and you're basically their only hope of finding it. And if that's the case, they need you so you can negotiate in a positive, professional manner, get better results, and start out with a much better working relationship. Women often don't realize that many companies set aside money with the expectation that prospective employees will ask for better compensation. They're not going to volunteer that extra money, of course, but it's often there. Salary.com found that 84% of employers expect prospective employees to negotiate salary, yet only 20 to 30% of women actually do negotiate. Unless you're dealing with a nonprofit or a small family business, there's usually about 3,000 to 5,000 more set aside, again, depending on what that total salary is. It might be more than that. But on average, 3,000 to 5,000 set aside, especially if their initial offer is below the going rate, but not always. Listen closely to the needs that the employer is expressing and look for ways to meet both your needs and theirs. Together, you're solving the problem. That's at the heart of interest-based negotiation. Think of both of you as being on the same side of the table, working together to meet both of your needs in that interest-based frame. So the problem is on that other side of the table. The two of you are tackling it together. Absolutely avoid win-lose language. Win-lose language would be things like, I absolutely need 10,000 more, or I can't live with that, or you're kidding, right? Collaborative language is, I really had in mind more than that, but I'm very excited about this opportunity. What can we do? Or my research showed that the range would be closer to X. How could we work towards something like that? Or where is there some flexibility within the offer? Always leave them feeling as if they've been treated well by you throughout the process. Show them the type of person that they'll be working with. Also, expect two main types of negotiators when dealing with the company. There's the hardline, closed-off posture, kind of scary. They state the amount as if there will be no negotiation, and then they glare at you. The other type is really nice and agreeable, and they try to get you to agree with whatever they say. You'll find yourself nodding a lot, and they're nodding a lot with this type of negotiator. They get you to like them and they probably are really nice people. I'm not saying that they aren't, but they get you to like them so that you feel uncomfortable asking for more for fear of disrupting this relationship that you're building with them. Be polite and pleasant, of course, but firm to keep the negotiation going. Now, I've left this part for last because it's very important. Women have to be careful about how they negotiate in ways that men do not. Men can stress their competence, skills, background, so on, as a standalone in the negotiation process. Women do best if they frame things not only in polite and pleasant ways with an interest-based approach, but are also best served if they use a collective approach. In other words, you'll want to frame things in terms of how your education, skills, and attributes will benefit the organization. Research has shown that if you lose sight of that in the negotiation, you pay what researchers call a social cost, no matter who you're negotiating with. We've all been socialized to think that women are supposed to think of others first, and those biases can definitely come into play when you're negotiating on your own behalf. So again, whatever these skills, attributes, experience, education that you have, frame them in terms of how they will benefit the organization. Just that shift alone will make a huge difference in how well that negotiation goes and how that what sort of outcome you get. You'll always want to negotiate base pay first, and then after base pay is set, you can negotiate all kinds of other things, or at least try. It could be vacation time, a sign-on bonus, moving expenses, cell phone, gym membership, travel expenses to and from work, working remotely, whatever it is that you have on your list that's important to you. And again, you'll want to put it in what's most important to you down to what's least important to you so that you can go through it systematically in the negotiation in terms of what's most important to you first, after base pay. So to summarize, I'd like to go over some of the most common negotiation mistakes and how to avoid them. So first, always ask for the offer in writing and for time to consider the offer. This buys you time to plan your negotiation approach, and it gives them time to worry about losing you to a competitor who might have extended a better offer. And prepare for every part of the process. That means doing your homework about the organization, what you're worth in the marketplace, questions you have for them, and so on before even the phone screen. And know your worth so you don't set your sights too low. Sometimes women will say to me, you know, I can get by on X amount, so I'm not going to ask for more. Well, you can get by, but if you can do better, why not do better? Keep in mind that nearly everyone has a bias that women should think of others first. So remember to talk about your education, experience, skills, and attributes in terms of how it will benefit the organization. As we said before, otherwise you're likely to pay a social cost in that negotiation. After you've agreed on base pay, look at the other things that might be negotiable and don't be afraid to ask for them. Employers will often, for example, agree to a one-time allotment of money like a sign-on bonus, but not a salary increase because that will cost them a lot more in the long run. And then the last thing, uptalk. As women, most of us were socialized to be pleasant and accommodating, to make others feel comfortable in our presence. One result of that, and supported by the research, and that I see in my office very frequently, especially when women are nervous, is that they'll go up at the end of their sentences as if they're asking a question instead of making a statement, because we're instinctively taught that a statement can be seen in a negative light, like maybe too confrontational, as if they're asking, is it okay for me to try to negotiate even though you lowballed me in such an insulting way that I feel like getting up and walking out, but I won't because I'm such a nice person? Uptalk at the end of a sentence immediately sucks the power out of the sentence that you've just uttered. So one thing you'll want to practice is to listen to your statements. If you're up talking, practice ending your sentences staying level or going down in intonation a bit, like you're making a statement. So practice that before the actual negotiation. But once you're in the negotiation, try your best not to think about it, because then it just becomes too distracting to think, oh no, I just up talked. I wonder if that sounded not as confident as I wanted and I blew it, and on and on and on. Don't do that to yourself. Just practice before and do your best to let it go if you notice it in the moment. So there are no silver bullets in solving the pay equity problem, but there are things that we can do. You can contact your congressional representative to tell them to co-sponsor a bill to try to achieve equal gender pay. Since 2016, lawmakers have introduced over 180 bills across the country aimed at minimizing the pay gap. You can ask for pay audits at your place of work when you get into a position that you can. Entry level would not be the place to ask for one, but once you get higher up, middle management or above, certainly you can ask for those kinds of audits. And if you're in a position to interview and hire, keep in mind that we all have some implicit bias that has contributed to the gender pay gap. So learn more about that and fight against those tendencies. And last, negotiate. Don't just take what's given. Negotiate. Learn how to negotiate and follow through when you're in the kind of, so when you've been offered a position and it's tempting to just not go there because it's uncomfortable and you don't want to make them uncomfortable, all those kinds of things. Remember, 84% of employers expect you to negotiate. Only 20 to 30% of women do. So be part of the percentage that does negotiate. If you'd like, jot down any questions that you have, because again, on April 4th, we're going to have a Q&A, some office hours to ask me any questions you have about salary negotiation. For those of you watching this video who will not be able to attend the Q&A, please feel free to contact me with any questions that you have or to do a mock salary negotiation. And if you'd like to contact me individually, you'll find my contact information here. Thank you so much for joining me. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you at the Q&A session. And if not, again, I would be delighted to help you with salary negotiation or any other aspect of your job search. Bye.